What's going on today, guys? Beautiful winter day out here at James C. Yerxa Nature Preserve. Absolute beauty. Today I'm going to discuss some camera settings that I think you should master as a landscape photographer. It's in your best interest to master these camera settings because you're going to run into these scenarios that I'm going to discuss a lot as a landscape photographer. And in my opinion, the best camera settings really comes down to what scenario you're in and what scene is in front of you or what you're trying to photograph. There isn't a one camera setting that's best for landscape photography. In fact, it's a very common misconception that your manual mode on your camera is the landscape photography mode, which is just a bunch of bullish. So the first camera setting that I wanted to discuss is actually bracketing exposures. As a landscape photographer, you're gonna bracket exposures probably 9 out of 10 times you're shooting landscape photography. That's why it's so crucial to learn this camera setting or technique, if you want to call it. But basically what bracketing exposures is you take separate images all at different exposures. That way you can create one image that has a full range of tonal value. A lot of the times in landscape photography, you're gonna come into scenes that have very high dynamic range, and to combat this high dynamic range, you're gonna use exposure bracketing. Think about any time you're shooting a sunset or a sunrise. You have super bright clouds and highlights, but then in your foreground, you typically have dark features in it like rocks, sandy beach, what have you. But basically within one given frame, you're gonna have something that's really bright and something that's really dark. Please, if you want to learn these camera settings in more detail, I can do full tutorials on any camera settings, any ones that we discussed, and I'll do a full in-depth tutorial on these settings. I simply can't do that in one video. It would just take too long. So if you guys found the most interesting thing was exposure bracketing, for example, then I could easily just do one video dedicated to that topic. So this is actually really good timing for you guys because we're coming into the winter months now, and now is a really important time to know how to bracket exposures because as you can see, there's always white stuff, and with all the white stuff, our cameras are faced with a high dynamic range situation. So depending on what camera body you use, it's gonna be different for every user. Like I shoot with Canon right now, we have Fuji, all these other camera bodies stepping into the scene, but basically they all will be equipped with some sort of bracketing feature. So just go ahead in your camera manual and figure out what the actual setting is called or how to enable it. Just become proficient with turning that on, being aware of how to use it properly. Could definitely bracket this scene. Holy cow, she's getting bright. So another camera setting that you're gonna wanna master for landscape photography or be proficiently in is your shutter priority mode because you're really gonna use this camera setting or camera mode quite a bit in landscape photography. As you get better as a landscape photographer and you learn more about advanced techniques such as ICM or long exposures, it really is beneficial to know how to use your shutter priority mode. In my opinion, your shutter speed really comes down to a creative choice in taking your images. And it's really unfortunate that people just kind of leave their shutter speed for last and they think that shutter speed really is just something that will properly expose your photo. You know, they choose their aperture. You know, you always want to keep your ISO as low as possible. So then what's your shutter speed going to be? Oh, well, it's just whatever equals a neutral exposure. Comes down to whatever you want to take a picture of and however you want to express that picture or that image. So the two camera settings to master in landscape photography so far is exposure bracketing and shutter priority mode. Another camera setting that you should really know and master for landscape photography is your aperture priority. So it's important to master your aperture priority mode within landscape photography, because every time you're faced with a scene, the first question you should ask yourself is, what do I want to include within this scene? What are some things that I can not include in the scene? Like for this frame right now, I most certainly want to be in focus, but all the other stuff isn't really that important. I would want to pick a really shallow depth of field that basically just showcases me because I'm talking to you, and all the other stuff in the background isn't really that important. Or if you were shooting this as a landscape shot and you wanted to showcase all these big, beautiful silver maples, you would shoot it at a really high aperture because that's going to give you a really deep depth of field. So much like your shutter priority mode, your aperture priority mode, it has the same premise. You're gonna choose whatever aperture you wanna shoot, and then the camera will automatically decide on your ISO or shutter speed to make sure the image is exposed properly. In other words, you don't have to figure out any of these other components. You can just say, I wanna shoot this scene here at f11. So you'd go to aperture priority mode, you'd choose f11, and then you just simply take your picture and the camera will do all the other work for you. So some scenarios where this is handy, the first one that comes to mind is actually woodland photography. A lot of the times in woodland photography, I shoot at a very shallow depth of field. So I'll turn on my aperture priority mode and I'll set it to 1.8 or something that's really shallow depth of field. And then I'll just walk around and take pictures within that aperture because I know that there's a lot of things that I don't want to include in focus within the woodland. So that's the third camera setting that I wanted to touch on just in this video. And these camera settings aren't typically talked about, it seems, for some reason. Everyone has the idea that landscape photographers only use manual mode, which is honestly just a bunch of bullshit. It really comes down to what scenario you're in, what scene you're looking at, what you want to shoot, what you want to do with the image. That's really what it comes down to. And then from there, you can decide what camera settings to use, which would help facilitate that process or whatever that desired outcome is. Thank you guys so much for tuning in to the video today. I really appreciate your time. I know we touched on a lot of things today, a lot of concepts. I know it's a lot to take in all at once when you're beginning. If you guys are following along to the channel, thank you so much for supporting me. I hope that you guys are continually getting value and information out of this channel. If you're new to the channel and you like what you see, give it a thumbs up and let YouTube know that you want to see more of me. And then after a couple of videos, you can decide if you want to subscribe or not. Hey! All right, guys. Peace out.